Today, I thought we'd talk a little bit about how to run easy. Now, you're probably saying, how to run easy? I mean, I know how to run easy. Easy is easy. Actually, in my experience, most people do their easy runs too hard. And there's two problems with that. One, they don't get the desired benefit of the workout. And then two, they're a little bit too fatigued to do their harder workouts hard enough. So you may or may not know how to run easy. Let's get into it. There are basically three ways that you get to easy, if you will. You can do it by effort, what the effort feels like. Effort is in many respects the best way because ultimately your body is not responding to anything other than effort. Running is about time and effort, or duration and effort, not about miles and paces. But most people use pace, and there's nothing wrong with that. I typically use pace. You can also use heart rate. So in general, if you've seen some of my other videos, I'm not the biggest believer in heart rate training, but for easy runs, I think heart rate is probably the most beneficial way to use it. There's also power. I'm not really going to touch on that. I think the vast majority of people are not using power. So effort, it can be great, but you have to be aware that effort can be lagging, meaning that the effort the first mile or two might not feel like the same effort towards the end. So it can be tough to judge whether or not that effort is right because you get started, you feel great, you have a lot of energy, and you've actually got started out a bit too fast. That's particularly important in long runs. I've seen a lot of people having an effort that they thought was easy enough at the beginning, only to find out in the last several miles of the run, they just get slower, 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 slower. And that shouldn't happen. You should be maintaining that same effort throughout the long run, or faster if you've got a pace type of a long run. So just be aware that effort is great, but it's tough to judge that effort right at the very beginning. You got to kind of get warmed up and into it. So pace can be great. Most people use pace. You do need to consider elevation, and you need to consider weather. So let's say your goal is to have an 8-minute pace for your easy pace, just making that up. Well, if you're going uphill, it's going to be slower than 8. When you're going downhill, it's going to be faster than 8. Weather, if you've got wind, if you've got heat, humidity, those things all affect what that pace should be to get the right easy effort. So nothing wrong with pace. As I said, I use that, but living in Florida, I have to adjust my pace quite a bit for weather. When it's warm or humid, I don't have a whole lot of elevation I typically need to worry about. And finally, I said heart rate. So heart rate, like effort, can be lagging. At the beginning of your run, your heart rate isn't going to be where you want it to be. You need to give it some time to get there. It's also more challenging on the hills. Your heart rate's going to go up on the hill, but not right away. It comes down on the hill, but not right away. So just be aware it's a lagging indicator. And you really need to know, I underline know, what your maximum heart rate is. Most people are using the guess that they get from Garmin or using the formulas. Those typically aren't right. The gold standard for getting your max heart rate would be to do a treadmill test where they push you till you're about to drop and they'll figure out what your max heart rate is for running. There are also ways that you can test it yourself. If you just go here on YouTube and search for maximum heart rate and running, you'll find videos. They typically use some hills to try and get at what your max heart rate is. But unless you have a pretty good idea what your max heart rate is, the heart rate training is not all that useful. There's also two ways. Most people are getting it with wrist-based heart rate monitors. You also have the straps. So I'm not trying to tell you not to have the wrist-based, but a couple of things that you need to be aware of. First of all, the wrist-based, I have one, is not actually measuring your heart rate. It's measuring the speed at which the blood is flowing through your veins and getting at your heart rate. In my experience, I also have a chest strap. My heart rate on my wrist monitor is going to be 2 or 3 beats higher than it would be with my chest strap, which is more accurate. Now, the chest strap, if you don't have it on good and good contact at the beginning, you can get some bad data at the beginning. But the bigger problem is with the wrist-based, it's real easy to get bad data in my experience because your arm is swinging and moving, and when your watch moves, you tend to get bad data. You'll all of a sudden say, oh, my heart rate was never that high, or my heart rate was never that low. One thing that helps is just really make this snug. The tighter the fit, the less movement your watch has on the wrist, and the more accurate it's going to be. Even then, I think it's still going to be a little bit higher than a chest strap, but it's going to be consistently higher. So as long as you've got something consistent, you've got something to measure against. All right, so let's talk about, basically there are 3 types of easy runs. There are recovery runs, there are easy runs, typically 75 minutes or an hour or less. And then there's long runs, which are, well, they're typically over 90 minutes, so I guess I left a gap in there. But you have recovery runs, easy runs, and long runs. Easy runs, or I should say long runs, sometimes have some pacing in them. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the plain vanilla, go out and run easy runs. I'm going to assume that your 5K pace is 8:30, and let's say your max heart rate is 185, because I'll give some examples of what you might be shooting for if those were true for you. Obviously, you would use your numbers. So if you're doing a recovery run, the biggest thing you're really trying to do is promote blood flow and mobility to the muscles. You're not concerned about trying to improve your fitness. That's not what it's for. It's just to keep you moving and get some blood flow going. So doing a recovery run too fast does no benefit for you at all, because all you're trying to do, muscles moving and blood flow. It should be very conversational. You should have a really, really easy time having a conversation with somebody from an effort standpoint. If you look at your 5K time, you're typically going to be about 2.5 to 3 minutes slower than your 5K time. So I said your 5K time was, I believe I said 8:30. I'll look 8:30. That would mean you're looking at 11 minutes or slower on a recovery run. People go, oh, I can't run this slow. Well, yeah, you can. You got to be careful that you don't have bad mechanics. But the fact is, if you have bad mechanics on the recovery run, you probably have some mechanic problems on your faster runs as well. And then finally, from a heart rate perspective, you're looking at 60% of your max heart rate, or a heart rate of about 111. And people go, oh my gosh, I'm barely moving to get to 111. Right, it's a recovery run. It's about getting blood flow and mobility more than anything else. Recovery runs are really, really easy. Now, your easy run, typically less than an hour. I think I also did 75 minutes or so. They're usually trying to maintain your aerobic fitness, so you're maintaining and grooming the aerobic work that you have. You do get some benefit from a cumulative effect of that, but really that's what you're doing. It should be a conversation pace. You should be able to, sing happy birthday, talk with somebody without gasping for breath all the time, but it's obviously a little bit harder than just recovery would be. It is typically 1 to 2 minutes slower than your 5K pace, so you'd typically be more like 9:30 to 10:30 in my example, and typically right around 80% of your maximum heart rate, or about 148, is where you would tap out on an easy run. For the long run, long runs, the two big things with long runs are leg time. It's just time on your feet, and fat metabolism. I spelled metabolism wrong, I just realized, but you know what I mean, metabolism. It's really important, especially for the marathon, but all your distance events, that your body is good at using fats, it's really fatty acids, as a fuel source, and you get a lot of that on your long runs. So when you run your long run too fast, you lose leg time, you're not out there as long, and you start burning more and more carbs. What you're really doing is teaching your body to be effective at utilizing the fatty acids. So you've got to get that pace right in the long run. It's pretty conversational. You should not have any trouble talking to people. It should be easier than an easy run, a little bit harder than a recovery run, but pretty much if you can't sing the happy birthday song without gasping for breath, you're probably running too hard. It is typically going to be 2 to 2.5 minutes slower than your 5K pace, so more like 10:30 to 11. And your heart rate's typically about 70% of max, or about 130 if you're using heart rate. So the key thing to remember is, keep easy, and then nail the fast ones. And when you mix it all together, you'll become a faster, stronger runner.